In the early 19th century, engineers faced the daunting challenge of building a direct railway line between Boston, Massachusetts, and upstate New York. Among the most ambitious pieces of this project was the creation of a nearly 5-mile-long tunnel running under the Hoosac mountain range. This tunnel would stretch alongside the Deerfield River, connecting the small town of Florida with the city of North Adams. The tools were primitive. Picks, shovels, and black powder were all that stood between the workers and the unyielding rock. Collapses were frequent. Without proper ventilation, the air grew suffocating. The work was grueling, and death became a daily companion. Progress crawled until 1865, when nitroglycerin, a powerful new explosive, was introduced. It accelerated excavation, but at a high cost. The first tragedy involving the substance occurred just weeks later. On March 20th, a 3-man team was preparing a blast deep in the mountain. One worker, Ringo Kelly, set off the charge too soon. His 2 companions, Ned Brinkman and Billy Nash, hadn't yet reached safety. The explosion buried them instantly under a cascade of rubble. Though Kelly claimed it was an accident, he grew increasingly paranoid afterward, insisting that shadowy figures followed him and whispers taunted him in the dark. Days later, Kelly vanished. When his body was discovered deep inside the tunnel, at the exact location of the fatal explosion, he had been strangled. No arrests were ever made. His death wasn't the end of strange events. More workers began claiming they saw ghostly shapes lurking just beyond the reach of their lanterns. Groans and screams echoed through the tunnels, even when no one was there. Some believed the spirits of Nash and Brinkman haunted the site. Fear swept through the workforce, and many men abandoned the project altogether. Desperate to salvage progress, project leaders turned to clergy and scholars to calm the workers. In 1868, they invited a well-respected engineer named Paul Travers to assess the situation. Travers, a Civil War veteran, expected to find nothing but superstition. But after entering the tunnel, he was overwhelmed by chilling sounds, agonized cries that brought him back to the horrors of Shiloh. Far from debunking the tales, he added credibility to them. Then, 1 month later, the worst catastrophe in the tunnel's history struck. A gas buildup in the central pump room triggered a violent explosion. 13 subcontractors working below were trapped. Most died instantly, buried beneath twisted metal and burning beams. The few who survived faced an even crueler fate. With the air pumps destroyed, water flooded in. Pushed deeper into the mountain, some managed to build a makeshift raft. But with oxygen running out, they eventually suffocated in silence. One man, a worker named Mallory, volunteered to be lowered into the tunnel in search of survivors. He returned barely alive, gasping that he saw no bodies. Only emptiness? It would take months to drain the tunnel, and in that time, remains of the dead slowly surfaced in nearby rivers. Locals began calling police with eerie claims. Ghostly figures had led them to the bodies. One miner described seeing a line of spectral workers walking silently toward a flooded shaft. He followed them, only for them to vanish without a trace. At the water's edge, he saw something floating, a bloodied, broken body of a boy barely out of childhood. As the man realized what he was seeing, a terrible wail erupted around him. When he looked again, the body had vanished. Eventually, the last of the 13 victims was found and buried. The ghost sightings lessened, but the unexplainable noises in the tunnel persisted. Hoping to uncover a rational explanation, the company sent 2 men deep into the tunnel, Superintendent James McKinstry and a university professor, Dr. Clifford Owens. On June 25, 1874, the 2 men descended into the cold, airless depths. As they walked, a strange sound floated up from the shadows. A moaning cry, unmistakably human. Then, a light appeared ahead, glowing blue and unnatural. It shifted into the vague shape of a person, but with no head. Suspended in the air, the figure stopped before them, seemingly observing. After a moment of still silence, it shrieked and vanished into the darkness. Even more strange events followed. 3 months after the professor's encounter, a local hunter named Frank Webster went missing in the woods near the tunnel. When found days later on the riverbank, he was bruised, confused, and weaponless. He claimed he had heard voices and followed them into a cave. Inside, he saw men silently working the stone, but they made no sound. Even their pickaxes were eerily quiet. Then, an unseen force wrestled away his rifle and beat him with it until he lost consciousness. The rifle was never found. Despite these harrowing tales, the tunnel was finally completed. On February 9th, 1875, the first train passed through, marking the end of a 25-year-long effort. The cost, millions of dollars and over 200 lives. Although the daily haunting claims faded, sightings of glowing orbs and other supernatural activity continued. In the fall of 1875, another unsettling incident occurred. Railway worker Harlan Mulvaney was delivering timber to the tunnel. His co-workers waved him in. Moments later, his wagon bolted back out of the tunnel. Horses panicked, and Mulvaney furiously whipping the reins. He vanished without a trace. Days later, his wagon and horses were found abandoned miles away. His coat and pipe were still in the seat, but Mulvaney was never seen again. Nearly a century later, interest in the tunnel's eerie past returned. In the 1970s, paranormal investigators began flocking to the site, drawn by stories in local papers. One such skeptic, Bernhard Haster-Barré, publicly declared the hauntings were a hoax. In 1973, he announced he would walk the entire length of the tunnel alone. Witnesses saw him enter. He never came out. Search teams scoured the tunnel, finding no trace. In 1976, another investigator reported seeing the glowing figure of an elderly man dressed as a miner. Bathed in white light, the apparition walked through a solid rock wall and vanished. Others caught inexplicable crying and whispers on tape, and one woman swore she felt someone unseen standing beside her in the dark. But not all spirits seemed hostile. Railway worker Joseph Impaco believed the ghosts had saved his life, twice. One evening, while clearing ice from the tracks, he heard a whisper in his ear. "Run, Ronzo, run!" Confused, he paused, just in time to be shoved backward as a train came roaring around the bend. Without that shove, he would have died instantly. Weeks later, while working alone to free frozen rail cars, he again heard a voice, this time saying, "Joe, drop it!" He let go of his metal tool, which was then flung across the tunnel wall by a sudden jolt of electricity. A power line had short-circuited above. If he hadn't let go, he would have been electrocuted. Over time, the Hoosac tunnel earned a grim nickname, the Bloody Pit. And it still lives up to that name. Today it remains in operation, with up to 12 freight trains crossing through it daily. One of the longest active tunnels in North America, it is perhaps also one of the most haunted. Were the hundreds of men who worked and died beneath the mountain truly stalked by the ghosts of their fallen comrades? Or is there a more earthly explanation? In dark, suffocating conditions, surrounded by death and fatigue, the mind can easily twist shadows into specters.